tariffs aren't the solution. I believe gold and silver are the solution. If gold and silver and the great abundance of the gold and silver you do have was leveraged appropriately, it could actually solve all of the debt servicing issues and the debt issues in the U.S.
Today's guest is a supporting sponsor of Liberty in Finance.
Welcome back to Liberty in Finance. We're glad to welcome this returning guest. Shawn Khunkhun is the director and CEO of Dolly Varden Silver. He joins us this Wednesday, March 12, 2025. Shawn, thanks for coming back on Liberty in Finance.
Thanks for having me on, Dunnigan.
I could not believe the last time we had you for our audience was at the Rule Symposium on Natural Resource Investing in Boca Raton, Florida last July. It's been far too long. If we look at the number of press releases and communiques that you've penned since then, it's very impressive reminders of how much progress Dolly Varden has made in several areas. Just to summarize, some of those major areas include expanding the definition of the resources that you have in your Kitsilano Valley region, in the Golden Triangle there in Canada, and also enumerating why the jurisdiction that you're in and the location that you're in has a proven one that's beneficial and favorable to your mining operations, and also how you're working to join multiple areas, to join two areas of resource and prove that they are geologically, that there's promising richness to be found along the entire continuum between those two. You could target any part of that to get us started, and I'll pick your brain on other aspects of that, but perhaps you want to start with location, which was the title of one of your recent articles, to show us why it is that people should be paying attention to where Dolly Varden is located.
Yeah, that is a nice opening remark. Look, what makes Dolly Varden unique is we have an abundance of a very scarce metal, which is silver. And silver is so scarce that there are only 11 meaningful producers of the metal that are listed. And so investors who are looking to get exposure to silver miners have 11 choices. A few months ago, there was 13 choices. However, Gatos Silver and Silvercrest have been acquired, one by First Majestic and the other by Coeur. And so investors today have 11 choices. Now, beyond those 11 silver producers, you have 4 big developers, 4 big advanced explorers. And what makes Dolly Varden stand out? Again, it's a very small group of companies. You have 15 companies in the space that matter. And of the 4 that are non-producing, that are big, that are high grade, that are quality assets, what separates Dolly is where we're located. And I think location matters. So one of our peers is in one of a very, very exciting jurisdiction in Argentina, and that's Abra Silver. So Abra is, in Argentina is on this big upswing, but there's been times in the past where Argentina has been, there's the old saying, as rich as an Argentine, where, you go back 100 years and it was the place to be. And then there's been other times in recent history where you've had, you'd had to go with wheelbarrows full of money, where they're literally weighing money in order to exchange for goods. The other company in that list is in Bolivia, and Bolivia has its challenges. And then the other company in that list is in Mexico, which, Mexico is the biggest silver producer in the world. However, with the narcos and with some of the socialist policy from the last 2 administrations, it's been challenging, to say the least. And so why location matters is we are in an area, and what most people will not appreciate is the fact that our project is technically in Canada, but it's really in the traditional territories of the Nisga'a Nation, who have sovereignty over their land. And why that's significant is what really drives the progress in this area that is referred to as the Golden Triangle. It's not federal government. It's not provincial government. It is really the Tahltan people who own much of the northern extent of the Golden Triangle, and the Nisga'a, who own much of the southern extent. And so understanding these nuances and understanding, like I always think, politics are local, issues are local, and you really need to understand. So if you look at our area at Dunnigan, for the last 100 years, we've had certainty. We've had uninterrupted production. We've had stability. And that certainty is going to last for the next 100 years. So why location matters is not only do we have access to clean hydroelectric power, not only do we have paved roads, not only is there a deep water seaport, not only are we in Canada, but most importantly, we're in the traditional territories of the Nisga'a, who are our biggest advocate for development because a portion of their population is unemployed. And they see a project like Dolly Varden as an opportunity to bring prosperity to their community.
It's interesting and frankly quite heartening as well to think about the continuity and stability that working with a original nation brings, because I remember we have some in-laws who were living in, like, for example, the New Mexico region before it was part of the United States. And they quipped to us at an event, they said, we didn't cross the border crossed us. So there's that idea of working with the original inhabitants, that there is that kind of stability that most people don't even think of. It doesn't even come on the radar of most people as they see the ever increasing I guess I would say contentiousness and snowstorm of press releases and everything in our modern world and in our digital media and everything. They forget that there's a significant and core, sort of the tap root of inhabitants of North America and probably most parts of the world who have been there since the beginning. So it's interesting, eye-opening statement about stability. You also talk about in some of your recent writings about the resource itself. Why is the Golden Triangle so noteworthy as from a geological standpoint? Can you talk to us briefly about that, and specifically the portion that Dolly Varden is controlling the development of right now?
It's interesting. I work with some brilliant scientists, right? Brilliant scientists. And I was sitting with one of those brilliant scientists yesterday, and he was and he happens to also be a director of the company, and so he's a geologist, he's a director, but he is also born and raised in the local community there. So he's a third generation miner, and so he was telling me his name is Robert McLeod, and Robert's from one of the most famous Canadian mining families, the McLeod family, where some of the relatives have been inducted into the Canadian Mining Hall of Fame. Others sit on some of the largest precious metals boards, or they're chairing some of the biggest companies. And so Robert and I were having a conversation yesterday, and he was talking about the Brucejack mine. So Brucejack is an operation that is producing 300,000 ounces of gold per year. It's run by one of the biggest gold mining companies in the industry, Newmont. And Rob was telling me about the mineralizing event that went on for 7 million years. And what makes Brucejack so unique and rich and special is the amount of time that went into bringing in the fluids, bringing in the gold mineralization. For 7 million years, you had this active period of breccias and rebrecciation, and that's what makes it such a rich area. And so that it's those little nuances beyond the fact that, you've got the communities who, for really not just the last 100 years, but if you go back 1,000 years, whether it was copper in the north, or precious metals in the center of the Golden Triangle. The Northerners have been, extracting the metal out of the earth. And so it's got the right geological setting. And it's why, if you look back at history, if you go back to the 1920s, okay, the most profitable gold and silver mine in North America was in the Golden Triangle. It was the premier mine owned by the Guggenheim family. And that operated, produced 2 million ounces of gold and 45 million ounces of silver. And it operated right, throughout the 20s, around the time of the Great Depression. And it really shielded the North. And people found prosperity at a time where there was so much hardship. And then you fast forward to more modern times, 1989, the Eskay Creek deposit was discovered, which Barrick was producing in the 90s. And Dunnigan, I want you to envision this. Go back into the 1990s and picture this area in northern Canada, right on the Alaska border. There's no roads, there's no power, there's nothing. But the price of gold was measured not at $2,000 or with a 2,000 handle, but with a 200. So at a time where the glaciers were there and a time where there's no infrastructure, with $200 gold prices, Barrick was making money flying gold out of Eskay Creek, flying it. That's how profitable it was. And then you fast forward, if 1989 is not modern enough, when Brucejack went into production, 2017, that's when the power, the roads, all the low cost, clean infrastructure is in place. And so look, it is defined as the richest 20 kilometers on planet Earth for gold and silver. And this is the area that I have focused the last 5 years with Dolly Varden, building this company for this coming bull market in precious metals.
I want to ask a difficult question at this time, because in your recent article about why jurisdiction matters, you talked about the relative stability of Canada in general versus a lot of the Central and South American regions where there may be have been a lot more political turmoil, crime, et cetera, recently, or financial distress. In recent weeks, there's been a lot of brouhaha about Trump tariffs and tariff wars back and forth between the U.S. and China, and concern about the future economic viability of importing metals produced in Canada to the United States, at least, perhaps other parts of the world. Can you tell us, put that in perspective for us, and let us know how you think potential investors or existing investors in producers or developers in Canada should be viewing that, and whether you think that this is a lot of posturing and will eventually result in the clarity that will come and the stability return, et cetera.
Great. It's a great question. It's a timely question. It's a relevant question. If this was 1979, I'd be concerned. If you look back the last time we were in an epic bull market for precious metals, in my opinion, what took gold from $35 an ounce in 71 to over $800 an ounce in 1980 was really the U.S. investor. And I think we've moved on again, and I don't know if you agree with the statement, but we've moved to a global world, where a lot of the demand for gold is coming from outside of the United States. It's coming from Russia. It's coming from China. It's coming from India. It's coming from, so the one thing I think that has an exemption and exception to the tariffs is gold and silver, because, the world wants gold and silver. And if I can't sell my gold or silver, or it's going to be punitive to sell it to the US market, well, then I can sell it to the rest of the world. And I really think the reason gold has gone from $300 to $3,000 is not because of the U.S. public.
Yeah, I just wanted to interject. I have to agree with you there, and I frankly am very concerned. I think that's to the detriment of the financial future well-being of individuals and institutions in the U.S. We've been, as you know, working as retail bullion dealers to individual retail buyers, but also if you think about how many moms and pops across the U.S. are assuming that the keepers of their nest eggs in endowments and insurance companies and retirement plans, et cetera, are doing prudent and right and taking care of business looking forward. I'm very concerned about the fact that you just outlined, that the rest of the world is thinking with their feet, looking forward strategically, and with a good eye to the knowledge of history, and understands, as Alistair MacLeod, former bank director from the UK, reminds us about what gold really means to the financial world, and that the US, both at the retail household level and at the institutional level, are woefully under-participating and under-prepared. So that's just a little way of saying I wholeheartedly agree, since you asked, and I'm very concerned about that. So as you were saying, even if the US erects a barrier of tariff walls, the rest of the world is still taking care of themselves by acquiring this hand over fist.
I look at, just going back to Dolly for 1 second, I look at some exciting things that are happening in not just our project, but our neighborhood. There's some exciting discoveries that are making the whole area more valuable. And when I think about the United States as a Canadian, I want a strong neighbor. I want a neighbor where we're working together. And what's concerning for me is after the Second World War, the official gold reserves have really shrunk. And thankfully, I think that thankfully the gold window was closed temporarily because, you had about 10,000 tons of metal that left your shores. That as official, I think the official estimates were close to 20,000 tons, and I believe the official estimates now are 8,000. So, we've seen a big move of metal post Second World War up to the early 1970s, and thankfully, with gold being set free and to be sort of quasi free, I think there's some argument around how free the price of gold is, but my point here is, look, I believe that a strong U.S. and a strong Canada and a good partnership, and that's why, look, we're going to be having an election up here in the north, and I'm hoping we elect a new leader that, I think Canada has got a bright future. I really do. I think, we've been given and granted an incredible endowment of resources. We've got more land than we have people, and 90% of our population lives within 100 kilometers, 60 miles of the U.S. border, and so we've got an abundance of beautiful land where we're well endowed with the resources. We've got clean air, an abundance of drinking water, and all of those things make us a great neighbor to the United States. And so I'm hoping for some political change in this country. And I'm hoping that, that really ushers in a new era of cooperation. And look, I don't think tariffs work. It was, you had a great president in Ronald Reagan that made this point, over 30 years ago that, tariffs don't work. And but I think Mr. Trump, and this is, in my humble opinion, I don't know what choices he has. He's up against a very difficult debt servicing issue. And I believe, though, that tariffs aren't the solution. I believe gold and silver are the solution. If gold and silver and the great abundance of the gold and silver you do have was leveraged appropriately, it could actually solve all of the debt servicing issues and the debt issues in the U.S. And I think there's some very brilliant people like Judy Shelton who've come up with some incredibly innovative ideas on linking linking current bonds to gold to do away with a coupon or a yield, and in exchange be the convertibility into gold. And I think that is something where if you really want to clean up the deficit, and if you really want to put the U.S. on a sustained path, and it's not just a U.S. issue, it's a Canadian issue, it's a European issue, it's a global issue. We've been operating in this massive credit system that's unsustainable. And it's, you look at some of these recent crises we have had, whether it was 2020, 2008, we need more and more and more money or debt to service. And we're reaching a moment where something has to give. And I just hope for all of your viewers, you're doing such a phenomenal job educating people about how they could safely move towards, maintaining their purchasing power and preserving their wealth.
If we could now take a zoom in view of Dolly Varden's resources themselves. So we're in this region that has indigenous people stability for hundreds of years. Now we're within the Golden Triangle geologically. That's got it's the richest deposits of gold and silver on the planet. And now we're zooming right into Dolly Varden's resources, which have been getting further defined since we met a couple of years ago. And specifically, your tantalizing title about joining two resources. Help us understand what these resources are that Dolly Varden has been studying, and what your latest drill programs have been revealing about the nature of these resources and whether or not, in fact, they are connected.
So if you go back in that rich Golden Triangle history, there was mines that were discovered and mines that were produced, like the Dolly Varden Silver Mine, like the Torbert Mine. And they were thought to be separate systems, separate deposits. And often if you go back, you'd look at there was different owners, different claim holders. What I have done is I have systematically created a land package that is about 10 miles from south to north. So we've got this contiguous package of 10 miles. And within that 10-mile package, we've identified 7 deposits. But the breakthrough was not looking at these deposits as individual deposits, but as part of one mineralizing system. And there's 2 areas on the property where we've actually got to within 300 meters. So we've taken these deposits that were, in some cases a mile apart, and we've contracted that through step-out drilling to expanding the veins. And we're now at a point where we're doing some ambitious step-out drilling that is going to show and test that theory that we have that this is one system. And if we do that, the implications are a lot more tonnage, a lot more gold and silver in between. And so that's exciting. And what the most exciting part of it all, though, because I've been around advanced exploration, development, and production for the last 22 years professionally, what I've found in my career, and this is what excites me, when you have 2 mineralizing systems coming together, as you get closer to that heat source, often what happens, and we're seeing this in our drilling, so we're finding silver on average at about 300 grams per ton. About 1/3 of a kilo is the average. But as we get closer to that heat source, the grade is elevated, it's doubling. And the mineralization that started as sort of narrow mineralization is starting to open up. So it's getting wider, it's getting thicker, it's getting richer. And what history has taught us through studying different deposits and having the experience is when these 2 deposits come together, there's the potential for something pretty meaningful in terms of grade and in terms of tonnage. And so that's exciting. And it's been validated because we started with 25-meter step outs, then 50, then 100, then 200. And, I've got such a great group of people around me. One of our directors, and he's also the head of our technical advisory committee, his name is Michael Henriksen. So Michael was with Newmont for 10 years as their head structural geologist. And Michael went all over the world suggesting to Newmont what projects are going to be tier one assets. My point is, we were at a recent meeting in January where we got the whole board together, we got the technical committee together, and Michael suggested that, look, it's time now to take some really big step outs. It's time to go from the 25, the 50, the 100, the 200. Let's go out 800 meters, he said. And I really celebrate, we're coming into a moment right now where small cap stocks are breaking out. The gold to S&P ratio is turning up. We're in a moment right now where for the first time in about 14 years, miners are starting to get attention, get inflows. They're starting to catch a bid. And so this is a wonderful opportunity. So just as interest is coming into the sector, we have a great understanding of our project, and we have $32 million in the bank, and we're going to take 20 million of that starting in May, and we're going to have 3 drills turning, and we're going to take those big, aggressive step outs. We've been very systematic. We've been very surgical. Some could even say conservative. But now it's time, with all the understanding, all the science, the structural analysis, the clay analysis, the radiometrics, it's time to hone in and see how big this system is. So it's an exciting time, but the great news is, Dunnigan, if we're unsuccessful, because in exploration, that is a possibility, we've already got 140 million ounces of silver equivalent identified on the property. So we have this foundational deposit. And at these metal prices, it's very, 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 very strong in terms of, the grade, the location. And so, no, it's an exciting time. I feel very, very grateful that I'm here right now as we walk into a moment where silver is starting to, and again, we're still only at an 88-to-1 silver to gold ratio. So I still think that despite small caps ticking up, and despite gold versus the S&P ticking up, silver to gold has a long catch-ups to still do.
And as you pointed out, there's been a couple of years here of really low sentiment on mining companies in general, exploration, development, and production. Some of the bigger producers have been leading in, and that's typical, as Rick Rule reminds us, that people will follow the big names that Warren Buffett or whoever are buying, but that a lot of the miners, the junior miners and development companies have been lagging, but now we're starting to see the beginnings of interest and turning the corner there. So it may be a perfect storm in a good way of discovering, as you're saying, bigger and richer resources than you realize at a time when the market is starting to wake up and look at this as an area of particular promise. If prospective investors want to find out more about Dolly Varden, we'll certainly put the link to Dolly Varden's webpage in the description of this video. Where else might they go, or what should they look for on the Dolly Varden website, and how can they reach out for more questions?
Yeah, they can go to dollyvardensilver.com. They can follow us at Silver Varden on X. We've got a toll-free number, 800-321-8564. So, we're available to talk to investors.
Well, thank you, Shawn. This is Shawn Khunkhun, the CEO and director of Dolly Varden Silver, has been joining us this time on Liberty and Finance. Shawn, thank you for joining us, and we want to get back with you again as soon as we can, because your news flow has continued to be quite eye-opening recently, and we'd like to make sure that our subscribers and viewers are well aware of that going forward.
Thank you so much for having me.